Hello and welcome to this, the latest in a series of reports brought to you by Deloitte. My name is Robert Bruce and I am a financial journalist. Today we'll be talking to the man who for the last 5 years has been the pioneer and the driving force behind integrated reporting. Integrated reporting is the evolving global reporting approach which brings together all of an organization's reporting strands and connects them in a way which can enable a company to tell an authentic story and shows how strategy, governance, performance and prospects lead to the creation of value over the short, the medium and the long term. It takes us a long way from just the figures. And across the last 5 years, real momentum has grown. And this has shown how important it is to underpin the integrated report with integrated thinking. This takes us beyond a purely economic measurement of organizational value to a much broader understanding of the connectivity and interdependence in the way that a business delivers sustainable value for all its stakeholders. It opens up a change to the system and behaviors rather than just another report. Paul Druckman has been Chief Executive of the International Integrated Reporting Council for the last 5 years. Now he is standing down. Paul, what's been achieved across those 5 action-packed years?
That's a very broad question. I have to say that from a personal point of view, it's been just amazing to have instigated something that is so global.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the key achievements that, frankly, if we'd go back 5 years, I'm not sure I had that sort of expectation. It's almost every capital market that you can name, there is an impact that integrated reporting has created. In terms of what have we achieved, I think one of the things that is really important to recognise is that we didn't bring something new. We brought together thinking that was happening around the world, but in a very siloed, unorganised manner. And the timing was right, otherwise it would not have been successful. But what we mainly achieved was to bring a coalition together around a common aim. And it's moved from the early days when we created the framework and the thinking to amongst that coalition to starting to actually create the awareness around the world, and now into what technically we call the breakthrough phase, which is the early adopters around the world. And that is certainly the legacy that I hope I will leave, along with I suppose a consistent language, which I'm not sure, which I think we've really brought to the fore in certain terms and certain ways of thinking that frankly I think we're all proud of at the IIRC.
What sort of things might you have hoped to have achieved, and somehow in this 5 year of action-packed whatever, it just wasn't possible? What are your regrets, I suppose?
Many regrets, Robert, but I'm not going to make them all now. But now I think the key disappointment, I'll call it, rather than regret, is the term I use, which is very harsh, but it sort of makes the point, is what I call organisational ego. And it's something that I have talked about quite a lot, especially in the last couple of years, where developments and momentum is in some ways stifled by really good organisations doing very honourable and great things, but not connecting up. So it's not so much the capital market side, it's those that are providing the thinking into it. And there is no doubt that there is a sort of ownership type issue, whereas I hope and think that the IIRC, if that's how people think about us, that would be a big regret. That we've always wanted to own a space and pushed other people away. I understand the underpinning that if you have too many players, it gets disjointed. and therefore you don't want to have different interpretations. But there is an element that even today where people are saying, no, we need to exist rather than we're part of something much bigger. So I would have said it's that. I'm trying to think of other regrets. I think if I had my time over again, would I do things differently? Probably the one thing that I did, I'm probably arrogant enough to still think it was the right thing to do, but I do regret it, is that in the early days we pushed away the sustainability community because we were determined to be focused on improving the financial system. And we probably pushed it away too much. And certainly because it was really they were the people who helped us create the IIRC and move it forward. And probably, and certainly under my, on purpose, we distanced ourselves to make a point. But it was probably too much.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the sheer scale of what has been achieved and emphasise how far it's extended around the world and how deeply it's extended around the world?
I think one of the things that, that's a great question, but can I answer it in a slightly, sort of get round to answering a question, but add something. And that is that I think it's really important that people don't think of integrated reporting as being the framework as a product. And so, a KPI about how many people, how many organizations are doing integrated reporting according to the framework and referencing it is, in my view, a mistake. We are mission driven, and that mission is not selling a product. And in many ways, we do want people to use the framework and to reference the framework. Of course we do. But at the end of the day, the momentum around what we've created is much more important. So you probably see where I'm coming from here. And I'm not making an excuse, but we can identify, many hundreds, whether it's thousands is a different question, of integrated reports, and people using the framework to do that. However, sitting here in London, the UK strategic report, would it have been like it is without the IIRC? Well, I don't want to be arrogant, but I don't think so. Certainly the UK FRC is a great organisation with lots of thought leadership. But so do we take into account every listed company in the UK in our numbers? No, we don't. Some people say we should. But the momentum, going back to your question, around the world is, I would imagine that you could go to anybody in the corporate reporting space around the world in any capital market of some size, from a Singapore, Malaysia to a Japan to some of the probably the more Western European countries, right through the US and in some parts of South America, and they would have heard of and basically understand what integrated reporting is. The danger is they don't actually know. It's more some people will not fully grasp what we're trying to do, but they will have heard of it and will know that it's something that's, I hope, is good. And so, there are 400 plus companies in Japan, but they don't call it an integrated report. Do you know what I mean? And but they are. You can identify them, and in fact, there was a study done looking at all the different annual reports and saying which of these are actually the same as integrated reports. The major corporates in Singapore, as well as public sector. Again, I could pick up all over the world. Last week I was in Germany, and there's a lot of discussion in Germany about the size of reports, and Siemens are leading a sort of anti-reporting initiative, which is interesting. But when you look at Germany, and even when we got started, so many of the best companies in Germany were doing integrated reporting, even if they didn't know it. And that's why it's not a product, it's a system. So, you know, it is embedded in so many capital markets right across the world, which I think is, I can go through each area, but I'm sure that's not what you want.
Do you think it's now going to move towards perhaps something closer to a standard setting organisation to try and just make things clearer, or do you think it ought to stay as a thought leadership, putting the ideas out and hoping that through KPIs and so on that'll work?
I actually think it's a balance between the two, actually, because I think the thought leadership is not good enough in its own right. The standard setting, in the form that we know standard setting, is a danger, right? Because it becomes something much more that isn't necessarily relevant to the business, right? Because it's not so much, you know, and that brings in the whole debate of who are the stakeholders and things, which perhaps we can address, certainly looking forward. So I think there's you know, it is somewhere in the middle, but I see a shift in the system. You know, so you know, not just corporate reporting, but the whole trust, transparency, credibility, understanding system, and integrated reporting fits into that shift. So it's, I don't think we've created the shift, but I think we're part of a momentum that's happening across the world that is inevitable. So I can't give you a straight answer because actually I'm not sure that it is a straight answer. We need regulatory support. Whether we need a standard is a different question, and if I'm honest, I don't know.
How do you see it going forward? Because you've had the 5 years of the building the momentum, setting it all up, telling the rest of the world, talking to the rest of the world, encouraging. And now we have the years ahead, which are the embedding years, which is always slightly duller, perhaps. How do you see all of that going, and how do you see the momentum being maintained?
Again, I think if we just talk about reports, you know, that I don't want to go there. Okay, because then we get into a discussion about regulators and all of that sort of thing, which is very much part of our strategy. But actually, there is a momentum around corporate governance around the world. Okay, and so and when we say corporate governance, that means different things to different people. But I'm talking about the bigger system. So, you know, in the UK, you have corporate governance codes and stewardship codes. In, you know, probably the best at the moment is probably in Japan, where they've got, you know, relatively new implementations of those. But it's even broader than that. You know, things like the discussion around Apple and tax, and the discussion, you know, and the private companies like BHS in the UK and Volkswagen, you know, the big scandals there. All of this points to something that will change in the corporate governance world. And integrated reporting really does underpin that. And what I call it is that what that needs is an information architecture. So at the moment, we don't have, without integrated reporting in my view, an information architecture that fits the new world of corporate governance, right? And I'm being quite broad in my meaning of corporate governance. And we need to do that. So it's not just about KPIs. It's not just about telling a story. It's not just about having you know, communication and trust being built in the company. It's about them all. And without that information architecture, the new system of corporate governance will fail, in my opinion. And that's why, to my mind, we as the IIRC and integrated reporting needs to make sure we position ourselves very clearly in that new capital market system that is inevitably going to happen. Many people will disagree with me, Robert, you know, especially those that aren't following, I would say, the trends that are there. But I truly believe that that's the way forward.
So you see this as very much part of a coming trend which you can underpin. I mean, is this is the sort of thing that the Prime Minister recently spoke of, presumably, without bringing politics too much into this, about responsible capitalism?
Yes.
You see it as part of that?
I do. I believe, right, and I think I've spoken about this before, but if we think of that top level, I believe that we existed, right, I use the past tense, but it's not quite true, in a world of what I call mono-capitalism, right, where everything is geared around the financials and about the profit number and the distributions to shareholders, right, as in their primacy. With integrated reporting, we've articulated what we call the multi-capital system of capitalism, where you must take account of a broader form of value creation. But actually what I'm seeing now much more is, let's call it inclusive or responsible capitalism, where actually there's a sort of delivery of a broader based prosperity. Right, and that's. And I'm not trying to be completely left wing here. It is a momentum that I think is now unstoppable. The inequalities that's demonstrated by Brexit, that's demonstrated by what's happening in the US and in many other parts of the world, in France, in Germany, etc., is something that is just, to my mind, an inevitable change that we see.
One point about integrated reporting, how far can you get this into the education of accountants and young people? Because young people are often very much more responsive to the whole issue of sustainability and to all the things you've been talking about. How do you get that into their DNA through the educational system that they will go through as young professionals or whatever?
Well, I think the accounting profession is actually the ideal place for this to move forward, because the accounting profession, is soul searching at the moment. Are they compliance people doing jobs that actually, in many ways, to some extent, robots and others will eventually do? And I'm not saying anything that the accounting profession doesn't know. And really going back to the trusted advisor type role is all part of that. But I know that's not directly on your question. But I think that what this comes down to is, I'm a chartered accountant. To be a chartered accountant, there's an ethical code. There's a professionalism that goes with being, naming yourself as that. I will never forget, and it's probably 2 years ago, I was at I was honoured to be the dinner at the Guildhall in London, which is wonderful, and it's one of those great things that I've been fortunate to do. And Mark Carney did a speech, and it was incredibly poignant, because he was basically talking to bankers, and he was saying, where is the individual responsibility and ethics of the banker as against the fines and the systems and procedures that goes into the bank? Right, where does it underpin? And so there is a gap, right? And I'm not trying to knock bankers. It was his rhetoric there. But what I'm saying is that to me it's part of the whole education process, not formal education, but the professionalism of the accounting profession that is starting to be embedded. So you go to the major accounting bodies around the world, and certainly IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, totally get this, right? And integrated reporting is part of that change. And if people can start to recognise that integrated reporting and integrated thinking and the whole piece that's bigger than us must be a fundamental of being a trusted advisor, being a professional accountant. It's happening. I mean, one of the things that, the G20 next year is in Germany. And in fact, the IFAC have written a sort of response to the G20 about what they think should be happening. And they have used this idea of, partly integrated reporting, but partly this bigger thinking that needs to be embedded in the system.
Would you like to talk a bit about the corporate reporting dialogue?
Yes, thank you for that, Robert. it is one of the big achievements of the IIRC. I mean, the IIRC is a very broad-based coalition, and it came out of a council meeting that the organisations that are reporting organisations, as against the broader coalition, said, well, we're all sitting around this table and we don't ever sit around a table together. Should we actually sit just ourselves? And there was a challenge and action on us to try and convene that, and we did. It's coming up for, I think it's 2 years, will be the end of this year. And I have to say that initially my concept and why I called it the dialogue was to not put pressure on outcomes, but to make sure that there was this dialogue happening. And from probably the first year was really getting to know each other. And I have to say that it wasn't so much from the IIRC's point of view, it was more, frankly, from the joining together of the financial reporting community and the sustainability reporting community. And of course, missing out of all of that were things like the intellectual capital and other things, but let's leave that aside for the moment. And the discussions that have happened over certainly in the first year, was building a understanding and a relationship between effectively two very siloed communities. Even though there are silos within each of those, they were very separate in their thinking. And really, the key thing of the dialogue is bringing the financials, the IASB and FASB, into the world of broader corporate reporting, and that's been its big achievement. We have, in the last year, done a few projects, and it's started to have some momentum. So we did the corporate reporting landscape map, which is a great tool. If there are any academics out there, go onto the website, corporate reporting landscape, and use it as a tool. It's got drill downs and all sorts of things about who does what within the 6 capitals and broader. And in fact, IASB led a project to try and understand if there are any common areas with materiality. And we've got other projects now on the burner, including things like sharing, what do we say to investors? So what do you say? What do you say? What do you say? What is the messaging? And trying to make sure that different stories aren't being told about each other in that. And I think that, again, is very powerful. The corporate reporting dialogue could and should be the key, not an organisation, but the key vehicle to make sure things are coordinated and kept together. Its biggest problem is it has no resources. It just needs a couple of dedicated people to really make it happen. But nonetheless, it is a unique opportunity. The weakness in the corporate reporting dialogue is it became too much just reporters, and it didn't bring in the views and encompass the market, especially business, but also investors and other stakeholders. And that's something that 2017 needs to be its primary driver. But it is exciting.
One of the other great outcomes of integrated reporting has, of course, been the concept of integrated thinking, which has really taken off. Could you just talk through a little bit of the influence and how that is working?
Well, I think why it's come about, in fact, our chairman, Mervyn King, has always accentuated integrated thinking. And when he talks about integrated reporting, he always says integrated thinking articulated by an integrated report. That is what integrated reporting is. But integrated thinking doesn't belong to the IIRC. And again, it's not a possessive thing. It is something that if you are articulating your value creation, both how you have and how you intend to create value, you can't do that just in a report. It has to be what's embedded in the business. And the biggest thing that we've found, the evidence that we've found, is that by having to produce a report, it's actually changed behaviours.
Yeah.
And I have to say, even for the IIRC, we've just released our own integrated report. And frankly, I was pretty cocky about that. We knew what we were doing and where we were going. But actually, it really made us think. Because it was fine to say these are the the main resources capitals that the IIRC uses. This is how we do it. Here are some outputs. These are the outcomes. And then we said, but what value have we created? Right? And actually, it really made us think about, from here, what did we achieve, both for the IIRC and for others. And I think, and we are definitely not unique. And frankly, I thought we were pretty good, and we weren't, because we hadn't really thought through the whole thing. And initially, integrated reporting with a lot of the pilot companies over the first 2 or 3 years, it enabled companies to make changes in their structure and management as a tool. But actually what it's moved on to as it's been used more broadly is challenged the strategy and what they're doing. And I can give you umpteen examples of great companies and great organizations that have changed what they do because they're thinking in this different way, but being challenged in a different way. And that's really the impact that it's had. There isn't a framework for integrated thinking. In fact, I don't like the term. It's a nonsense term, really. But nonetheless, it does give you the concept of actually thinking back into the organisation.
And after all this, what do you do next? Where do you go?
Well, I'm not retiring, as I keep saying, but I won't have a full-time day job, which in terms of a focus thing. But there's a lot of things that I still want to do, around this area, around broader areas. I have an interest. I'm very interested in the accounting profession. I'm very interested in corporate reporting. I'm also very interested in the development of the capital market system, and how to bring the sort of, it's a broader based thing, the sort of eradicating poverty and the problems of the world that is coming into a sort of capital market system which breaks down that, I spoke about before, the delivery of a broader based prosperity. Yep. How do we do that? Mm-hmm. I actually don't have the answer, which is what intrigues me. I'm not sure there is an answer, but nonetheless, there's a lot that I still want to do, as well as, of course, playing a bit more golf.
Paul Druckman, thank you very much indeed.
Great pleasure, thank you.